I would just like to introduce our professor today. Dr. Jerry Gold graduated from Queens College in SUNY with a major in psychology and received his PhD in clinical psychology from Adelphi University, where he also received a certificate in the practice of psychoanalysis. After working in a psychiatric hospitals for several years, he divided his time between the private practice of psychotherapy and academia. He has been on the faculties of Yeshiva University, Long Island University, and NYU, and is currently a professor of psychology at Adelphi University. He has edited or written over 4 books and over 100 scholarly articles, chapters, and reviews, primarily concerned with improving the effectiveness of psychotherapy. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to you and say thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Thank you all for coming. Really 3 related things. One is, um, what are the advantages and benefits of majoring in psychology wherever you might go to college? The second would be to describe the major in psychology at Adelphi and to talk about some of its unique qualities. And the third would be to really talk about careers in psychology once someone has decided to study psychology. Okay, so let me start with talking about the advantages and benefits of majoring in psychology. And let me see if I can just show you something to start out. Okay, so here we have a document. Let me get rid of this so I can see. Psychology, the major with endless possibilities. And that's really kind of true, because if you look at this list of possible career titles, these are all careers that our majors who have become graduates um, are engaged in at this very moment. Everything from advertising to youth center director, with a lot of things in between. Okay? Um, Regardless of where your career path and your academic path take you, uh, psychology builds many skills that are applicable to just about every profession or every job or every activity that you might want to pursue. Um, we emphasize strong interpersonal communication skills, certainly knowing about other people allows people to be helpful to other people. There is a strong research and quantitative component in psychology that allows people to evaluate data, to do research, to consume research. And it promotes an understanding of the world in which we live, the economic factors, the social and cultural factors, and all of the other things that impact human behavior. And so here's a list of the jobs that many of our psychology major alumni are engaged in this very moment. Um, so just take a look at this for a second. And again, if you have any questions at any point, please feel free to interrupt me. Now, if we go back to these careers and jobs here, as it says, many of them require an advanced degree. Um, I can point out, for example, clinical psychologist, counseling psychologist, forensic psychologist, speech pathologist. All of those jobs and careers require at least a master's degree and typically a doctoral degree. But that doesn't mean that it's necessary to be committed to going to graduate school if you want to major in psychology. And it also doesn't mean that you have to be committed to a field in psychology or in um, related areas. Uh, People who want to go to medical school often major in psychology, because what could be more helpful to a physician than understanding people and that person's actions? So much of what contributes to disease and wellness, um, compliance with treatment, uh, emergency room visits, all kinds of things are really based on a person's psychology. And so the more skilled and knowledgeable a physician might be in his or her work, then the more effective and the more satisfied that physician might be. Same really applies to nurses, um, to anyone who works with people in any capacity. And try to find a job where in some way you're not working with people. Even if you're going to go into coding or into cybersecurity or into engineering, there's always going to be a product at the end where you're going to have to deal with other people in some way or the other. Certainly, if your interest is business, um, sales, um, law, all of those things require um, excellent communication skills and understanding of other people's behavior, uh, ways of understanding data and knowledge, all of which are enhanced and developed by majoring in psychology in this way. Okay, so it's never a major that's going to be wasted. It's not a major where um, you will regret after spending 3 or 4 years studying these particular topics. You're going to come out and say, why did I do that? It gives you a great deal of flexibility. It gives you a solid foundation. Um, it's a major that's customizable too. And what do I mean by that? You can take it in whatever direction you might want to go. If you're more interested in the hard sciences, you can take it towards neuropsychology. If you're interested in a more clinical area, you can take it towards clinical psychology or counseling psychology. If you're interested in children, you can take it towards developmental psychology and education. If you're interested in the elderly, there's a really burgeoning field right now of geropsychology. That is the psychology of aging and the elderly. If you're interested in learning disabilities or individual differences or social problems, um, all of those things fit in under the umbrella of a psychology major. So it's very hard to find a good reason not to do this. Now, of course, if you're solidly interested in math or biology or anthropology or dance, of course, those majors are really important and very valuable as well. But um, if you don't have a particular passion for something else, this is something clearly that's worth considering. Um, Let me go back to that document for a second. I just want to point out that if you're still in the process of considering what you might want to major in and how you might want to spend your working life, although this is very early in the process for all of you, and there's no reason to feel like that you have to know what you'd like to do, here are a couple of resources that people find very helpful in terms of researching careers and occupations, getting information about uh, pay scale, opportunities, how to look for a job. Um, there, as you see on ONET, there are actually assessment instruments that is helping you refine your interests and find a good match between your skills and interests and what a job or profession might require. So I'll give you a second if you'd like to make a note of either or both of these websites. And here's a third. Okay, so let me come back. Generally, when people think about majoring in psychology, studying psychology, or having a future that's involved in psychology in some way, what they may or may not realize is that psychology is a very broad umbrella of disciplines and professions. Um, there's never a person who is simply a psychologist, and there is never a course simply in psychology. Um, each psychologist would have another label attached to the label of psychologist if he or she is practicing. Uh, uh, as was mentioned before in the introduction, I'm a clinical psychologist. There's clinical psychology, counseling psychology, developmental psychology, um, occupational psychology, experimental psychology, mathematical psychology, social psychology, personality psychology, measurement psychology, and many other branches of psychology as well. In a psychology major, you would be exposed to some extent to most of those, and you get an idea about what psychologists do in all of those areas. And as you would proceed through the major, um, you'd get an idea about which you might want to study in. And by the time you get to your junior and senior year, you'd start to be able to take electives in psychology that would match the particular brand or subspecialty in psychology that you were most interested in. And let me show you then how the major in psychology at Adelphi actually works. Um, so I've got to get out of this. Okay. This is, if I can find it here. Okay. Where'd it go? Okay, just got to give me a second. I'm sorry. Okay. Why is it not coming up? Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just having a little trouble getting the right document up. All right. Let me do it this way. There it is. Okay. Okay. So this is a description of the psychology major at Adelphi. And what you'll see here is that it's sort of an ascending progression, moving from what we call the foundation requirements into different areas of psychology into electives. So let me just try to make this larger. Okay. Okay, so what you can see here is that all of our students have to take these 6 courses. This is the basic foundation of understanding psychology. So students come in unless they've taken AP credits in psychology, a general psychology course, which reviews the field in a very broad way. Then there's writing in psychology, because writing a paper, writing a research project up requires different formatting and a different way of approaching references and reporting data than other fields do. Statistics, in order to write up the studies that one has done, one has to know how to analyze data. So anybody who studies psychology pretty much in any university or college would be taking a psychological statistics course. Then we require the history of psychology, because the field is now about 145 years old, and there are certain trends in the field that go back to its very origins. There are very famous studies that we would expect that all of our students would be familiar with, and there are also reasons to let go of the past that we would want our students to be familiar with. And then finally, psychological research, which is an opportunity for students to actually learn how to do research and to conduct small studies of your own, um, as a way of really getting hands-on experience. We then move on to the first area where you have some choice in these four domains: the biological and cognitive, the social and personality, developmental and clinical and applied. And basically, you would take one course in each of these four areas. I'm going to move past this comprehensive assessment portfolio. Then, um, at this point, number 4, when we start talking about electives, we're talking here about more than likely the second semester of a student's sophomore year, or the first semester of junior year is really when there's the opportunity to start selecting electives. And you can see that these again are in these 4 domains, but there's a wide choice here. And we require one elective from each area because we would like our students to have a broad exposure to the different approaches to psychology. Let me just leave that there for a second so you can see what's available. Just as an example, if you look over here at these advanced topics courses, where it says PIA 482, Advanced Topics in Personality and Clinical Psychology, I taught a course in this number over the summer, and it was called Madness in the Movies. And what we did is we watched 10 different movies, each of which had as its main character somebody who was suffering from some form of mental illness. And we talked about the ways in which the filmmaker and the actor or actress really portrayed somebody who was suffering from that condition accurately or not. And it was really a lot of fun to do this. And then we have the final experience that one completes in the senior year. And as you can see, 2 of them are called Practicum. The third is the Emerging Scholars Program, and the fourth is an internship. This is where, after completing 3 years of the major, a student has the opportunity to really apply what she or he has learned in a particular area of that student's choice. So in the practicum in developmental psychology, the student would have the opportunity to work with kids in a nursery, in a daycare center, in a preschool, in a program for children with developmental disabilities, and so on and so forth. And we have a wide range of settings for students to do this. The practicum in experimental psychology is an opportunity to do research under the supervision of a faculty member, a research in really whatever area that student might be interested. And then we have versions of the practicum that are even more extensive for students who would really like to dig in to an applied experience in psychology. And typically the students who complete either 491 or 488, that is the Emerging Scholars Program, or the psychology internship, are students who are really aiming towards a career in psychology and graduate school. These are wonderful experiences in which one can bolster one's application to graduate school. We have had students, for example, who have presented research that they've done in the Emerging Scholars Program at national conferences, and who have actually published their research in scholarly journals or as chapters in books. And when we go to look at the psychology internship, this is a clinical experience. That is, you might work in a psychiatric hospital, or in a facility for people with intellectual disabilities, or in some other area in that way. And as it says, application is required. These are competitive experiences, really, again, for people who have excelled during the major and who are very committed to psychology as a profession and as a career. And just about every student who goes through the Emerging Scholars Program, which is a year-long experience in doing research or the internship, get into graduate school or medical school or dental school or law school if that's what they're looking for. So it's really an advantage for our students. And it's experiences that um, the students really talk about with a great deal of excitement and pleasure. And so this just lays out the courses that I went through before in terms of the sequencing. You can take a look here to see how you might spend your 4 years here. And if any of you are interested, at the end of this meeting, I can give you my email address and I can send you some of these documents if you would like to have them. Um, they're also being recorded, but and you can go back and watch this if you like. But if you'd like to just have the file, I'd be happy to send these things to you. Well, if you were double majoring, it wouldn't change at all. The main thing about a double major, which is certainly possible at Adelphi and most places, is that you would essentially use up all of your non-major electives by taking the courses in the two majors. So, for example, the psychology major is 41 credits. There are approximately 40 credits at Adelphi in what's called the general education program that every student has to complete. The major is 120 credits. So that leaves 35 to 40 credits of electives for a student to take. And electives in any area, in anything. So if you're taking, let's say, psychology and biology, you would pretty much use up those 35 extra credits by taking the second major. Does that make sense? A minor is sort of an abbreviated version of the major. The minor in psychology um, that we have at Adelphi is 18 credits. So you would, if you wanted to major in biology and minor in psychology, you would simply select a certain number of psychology courses as your electives, and then that would, accrue and allow you to qualify for the minor. Um, Students ask about minors sometimes. There really isn't any necessary point in designating a minor um, from any area because it doesn't show up on your diploma and it really doesn't offer any particular advantage. If you happen to be interested in psychology as a biology major, um, and you want to just take as many credits as you want, that you'd probably complete the requirements for the minor without even thinking about it in that way. Okay, does that make sense? And I'm glad you brought that up, is that we have a second major in our psychology department, which is called neuroscience, which is actually a joint program that's run between the psychology department and the biology department. And it actually has two tracks. One track goes towards psychology, and really you might call it behavior behavioral biology, and the second course really goes into a more of an emphasis on the biological end of things with a psychology component added to it. Okay, so let me go back to start this. Okay, does anybody else have any questions? That was a great question. It would be the same thing. You would major in biology. I really doubt that there are many undergraduate programs that would lend themselves towards forensic biology. I think they're going to be much more general than that. But there are probably a couple of courses as electives in a biology department that would lend themselves towards more forensic kinds of things. So you would take those as electives, and then you could take whatever psychology courses you might want to do that. Let me go back to the document that I was showing you. Okay, why is this not working? There we go. Okay. So if you look at over here where it says clinical and applied under these electives, we have two courses, for example, PIA 355, Introduction to Forensic Psychology, and PIA 386, The Psychology of Criminal Behavior. So those would be very applicable to anyone who wanted to study, as you pointed out, forensic biology in that way, because the biology and the behavior are really very much linked together. Oops, I'm just looking for something else here. And probably a course like PIA 494, Advanced Topics in Cognitive Neuroscience, or Advanced Topics in Mental Health, would be very applicable to forensic issues as well. And sometimes in those courses, we actually give forensic psychology advanced topics. Okay, stop share. Okay. Anybody else have a question? Okay, so let me talk a little bit about the field of psychology and careers in psychology. If you're interested in pursuing a career in psychology, you have to have an advanced degree. And the advanced degree is typically a doctoral degree. There are two doctoral degrees that one can obtain in the United States. They overlap considerably. They have a slightly different emphasis, at least in theory, although practically speaking, they're almost identical to each other. The two degrees are the PhD in psychology and the PsyD in psychology. That's capital PSY period capital D. A PhD, as you probably know, is usually thought of as a research degree. A PsyD is meant to be the equivalent in psychology of the MD degree in medicine. That is, a person who enters a doctoral program that offers a PsyD is very much interested in being a practitioner in some area of psychology. Now, in actual fact, most PhD programs in clinical psychology and in counseling psychology and in school psychology, whether or not they offer a PsyD or they offer a PhD, they tend to train people who are both practitioners and researchers in that way. So they're pretty much indistinguishable from each other. But the main fact is that in order to work as a psychologist, one has to obtain a license in psychology. And in, I think, 48 out of our 50 states here in the United States, you have to have a doctoral degree to qualify for a license. There are one or two exceptions. I know Vermont, you can get a license with a master's degree, and I think Alaska, it might be the case as well, although I'm not entirely sure about that. If you're not interested in pursuing a doctoral degree, there are several different professions in which a master's degree is considered a terminal licensable degree that allow you to practice some aspect of psychology or something related to it. The first is school psychology. Okay? School psychology typically leads to a master's in school psychology. There's then a license that is available to people. And if you've ever had any contact with any of the school psychologists in your own schools, you may have seen that some of them have doctoral degrees and some of them do not. They're both legitimate professionals in that way. And of course, school psychology is a field devoted to helping students learn and to helping students deal with behavioral and emotional cognitive problems. It's a field that involves a lot of assessment, that is testing and identifying students' strengths and weaknesses and interests and so forth, and then developing plans for enhancing their education. Another area that doesn't require a doctoral degree but would allow you to practice after a master's degree is a relatively new field in New York, which is called mental health counseling. Um, the work that a mental health counselor does in many ways is identical to what I do in my private practice. That is providing counseling and therapy to individuals, to kids, to families, to couples, to groups. Um, this is somebody who goes through a master's program in mental health counseling. It's usually a 2-year program plus an internship year. And it again is a licensable profession. There's a related profession of marriage and family therapist, which is equivalent in training, 2 years of school, a third year of internship, and then a license. And the other area that many of our graduates go into, um, which is a 2-year degree that allows people to work in mental health as well as in many other areas, is the area of social work. Social work leads to a Master's of Social Work MSW degree. Um, a clinical social worker may do psychotherapy and counseling. They may work um, in senior centers, in child care centers, in schools, in hospitals, in nursing homes, um, helping people to deal with the bureaucracy of life, the government, deal with insurance issues, deal with aftercare plans, but also very much involved with mental health. Okay? Um, I mentioned before that there are many areas of psychology and many professions within the general profession of psychology. So I just want to take a minute or two and sort of describe what those particular specialties are. Again, um, I'm a clinical psychologist. That means I deal with clinical problems, that is essentially with mental illness and mental disorders, from the mild to the most extreme. I've worked with many people who are suffering from mild anxiety, phobias, um, worry, um, many people who suffer from depression, people who suffer from obsessive compulsive disorder, uh, personality disorders. And when I worked at hospitals, I worked with people that you're not as likely to see in a private practice setting, people suffering from what we call severe and persistent mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, major depression, suicide, drug and alcohol problems, things like that. Um, and the role of a clinical psychologist is to evaluate people, to help come up with the proper diagnosis, the proper treatment plan, and then to provide the treatment in the form of one version or another of psychotherapy, individual psychotherapy, group psychotherapy, family psychotherapy, play therapy with kids, and so on and so forth. It's something that I've been doing for 40 years, and I've done many thousands of hours of this, and it's a very rewarding, can be difficult, but very rewarding way to do things. Counseling psychologists do very much the same thing. They offer psychotherapy and counseling to people, but they also tend to work with less severe problems and to work with quote unquote healthy people. So they might work with an individual to make career decisions or to make educational decisions, uh, things like that. I mentioned school psychology already. I won't go into those things. Um, there are psychologists who work in industry in what's called uh, human performance. That is, they work with video game designers, computer designers, um, engineers, and architects to help the person who's designing something to understand how the user will respond and be affected by whatever product or building or car or um, software that person might be working on, and to enhance the experience for the individual. Because the person on the technical end may not have a complete understanding about how people are going to respond to whatever she or he is designing in these kinds of ways. Um, Industrial psychologists work in businesses and industry to help maximize performance, to help employers and employees um, make the environment as conducive to productivity, to health, to safety as they possibly can. Developmental psychologists study children and adolescents. They study their intellectual and cognitive development. They study emotional development. They study the interactions of the individual and their families and schools and society. Social psychologists study social problems from an individual and psychological context. Um, for example, social psychologists are probably spending a great deal of time trying to understand why people in particular groups will be voting either for former Vice President Biden or President Trump, and how those kinds of political decisions are influenced by psychological variables. Experimental psychologists do research. They do research in any area of psychology that they might want to do. And those are just a few. There are other specialties within psychology as well. So it is a very broad and in many ways unlimited discipline and profession for people. So I've been talking now for about 45 minutes. I'd like to give you the opportunity to ask questions, comments, share any ideas you might have. So does anybody have anything you want to bring up?
I know I had one question that
Sure.
I always ask. Is there anything that you can suggest for teens that are in high school as of right now that they could maybe be doing, or something that would help them either prepare for different skills that they could maybe use eventually in the program, or to help them when they're applying for maybe a major in psychology? Is there anything that they could be doing right now that would help them?
Sure. Well, one thing is, I don't know the particular high schools that any of you go to, but many of the schools in this area offer an AP course in psychology, um, which will get you, if you get a reasonable grade on the AP exam, will get you 3 credits that you don't have to take, and also give you an introduction to what it's actually like to study and learn about psychology, which may help you make up your mind about whether you want to pursue this or not. So that's certainly one thing that students can do. Um, and sometimes it's not even a bad idea to take AP psychology and then start with intro psychology in college anyway, to take a course that you're familiar with, um, and that you don't have to be learning from scratch in that way. Um, I think I don't think it's really necessary to uh, do a lot of preparation for this. I mean, I think life prepares us all for studying psychology in a lot of ways. So the thing that I would encourage any student who's thinking about psychology to do is to try to cultivate your own curiosity. Just do what a psychologist might do, which would be simply to think about your interactions with other people, or think about yourself, and just be curious about, why did I have that thought at this time? Why did I remember this? Why does this person seem to be responding in this way? And it's not even necessary to come up with answers as much as really it is just to cultivate the curiosity about the questions in this way. So, I mean, I'll give you an example of this. So, I'm actually now not sitting at the top of Adelphi's campus. I'm sure none of you were fooled by that. I'm sitting in my basement, and a few feet away from me is my laundry room. And um, I was washing out some clothing in the sink a few hours ago, and I had this memory of a vacation I had taken in California a few years ago. It just sort of popped into my head. And it was a very pleasant memory of walking down a particular street in a beautiful little town in California, heading towards a very nice restaurant. And so um, the question that occurred to me was, why am I thinking about this right now? What am I telling myself by remembering this in this kind of way? And I'm not sure I came up with any particular answer yet, and I may never, but that's the most important thing about being a psychologist. And it's a skill that we all have to cultivate, about being curious about ourselves and other people, because that's really all psychology is. The entire field is a big answer to people's curiosity about themselves and other people. It's just that we have, in some ways, refined our methods beyond simply asking the questions. But asking the question is the most basic thing about that. The other thing I think what any student could do if he or she wanted to is there are loads of general introduction books out there. Um, and I'm sure there's a behavioral science psychology shelf in the library, right? Go to it, just skim through the titles, um, see if something captures your interest, crack it open, and see what you find in there. Um, and I think that's, again, that's about just using your curiosity to delve into things a little bit more. Okay, anybody else? Okay, there's actually one more document I would like to share with you then. And this is my plug for Adelphi. Um, uh, I'm an Adelphi alumnus as well as being a professor at Adelphi. I graduated in 1980. I was hired as a full-time faculty member in the year 2000. So this is my 20th year of being a full-time teacher, although I taught part-time at Adelphi for many of those years in between. And one of my main professional goals was to get back to Adelphi and get a job there. And it only took 20 years for them to finally hire me. So they weren't in a rush. And I hope they haven't decided that they made a mistake, but it doesn't look like it, that they think that. And why did I have that as a goal? Because I really love the place. Um, and Adelphi has a lot of advantages as a college or university. Um, it's kind of like thinking about the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? One is too hard, the other's too soft, and then the chair in the middle is just right. Adelphi is not too big, and it's not too small. It's big enough that there's a lot of stuff going on and a lot of interesting things happening. It's small enough that you can have a personalized experience and get to know people, including the faculty, really well if you want to. It is a really warm and welcoming place. It is a very diverse place. We have one of the most diverse student bodies in the New York area and maybe in the country. We have a very diverse faculty. And for a relatively small university, we have a faculty that is full of very high achieving and very prominent people in their various fields. I'll give you just one example of this. It doesn't have anything to do with psychology, but it's just an example of the status of some of our faculty members. One of our professors in the music department won the Pulitzer Prize for composing a number of years ago. And the opera that he composed that won him the Pulitzer Prize is the most performed opera in the United States. And that's just one example of the quality of people that we have on the faculty. There is something very unique about studying psychology at Adelphi, however. Adelphi was the first university in the United States to establish a separate school of psychology. I'm a faculty member in what's called the Gordon Derner School of Psychology. Psychology departments are always within the School of Arts and Sciences. Okay, now, why is that important? It's important because from the first day you walk in as a psychology major as an undergraduate until the day you might leave with a PhD, you are surrounded by a faculty in a school that is run by psychologists and where the faculty and the students only respond to other psychologists. So you get the absolute best of the expertise of a school devoted to this, in the same way that if you went to medical school, you would only be taught by doctors. You wouldn't be taught by people who have PhDs in English or PhDs in I don't know, in something else that might be really important, but just really isn't particularly applicable to what you're trying to study in this way. So it allows Adelphi to offer instruction from people that an undergraduate would probably never be exposed to at another university. I'll give you an example of this. One of my colleagues, who was actually hired in the same year that I was, his name is Mark Hilsenroth. He was identified in the leading psychology journal in the United States, which is the American Psychologist, as one of the 50 most productive psychologists in the country. Okay? Now, having somebody of his stature on anybody's faculty is an enormous achievement, but he teaches in the undergraduate program as well as at the other levels. That would never happen in another university. That he would be off in his office doing research and maybe once a year give a seminar to doctoral students in this way. And our students have the opportunity to take classes from him, to work in his research lab, to really get to know him. And there are many people on our faculty who are of that stature who are teaching undergraduate students in that way. And that is a huge advantage. If any of you, for example, wanted to go into graduate school in psychology or medicine or law or engineering and got a letter from somebody of that person's stature, it would carry a great deal of weight because his name would be recognizable to people in psychology and outside of psychology. And he's not the only one. We have many people at that particular level of recognition that way. So for a little school that doesn't have a huge reputation, it has a great deal to offer people. And that's why I spent 20 years trying to get back there. Um, and I'll give you an example before I stop of the quality of the interactions. While I was getting my PhD, the way PhD programs work is you get a research advisor who supervises your research, teaches you how to do this, who becomes an essential mentor. The person that I worked with, his name is George Stryker, and he is a psychologist with both a national and international reputation. And I graduated from Adelphi 40 years ago, and we have stayed friends for the past 40 years. In fact, I would say he is my best friend and has been for a very long time. And he has smoothed the way for me at many steps in the development of my career in that way. And that's because of the size of the place and the warmth and atmosphere that has been created between the faculty and the students. And that is a unique experience for many, many people. So that's my plug. I hope you'll consider Adelphi when you're thinking about colleges. I will tell you also that Adelphi is very liberal with financial aid. And a lot of it is based on academic performance as well as on financial need. You do well, you qualify for all kinds of scholarships, no matter who your parents are or what their income is. In that way, we like to give to our students and we like to see them succeed. Anybody have any other questions, comments, thoughts that I can address?
I will say this, while if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. But I also wanted to mention, if you do find that you are interested in Adelphi, if you check our website, we did have a panel discussion a little while ago with a representative from Adelphi and Nassau Community College, where they discussed their admissions process as well.
Okay,
So that's definitely something that you can check out. We also had a representative from Farmingdale State who discussed SUNY admissions as well. So definitely check out our website and you'll see a whole bunch of different college classes that were discussed and admission programs and things like that. So
great. And let me just say, my email address is very complicated. If you want to reach me, it's gold@adelphi.edu. And so if you have any other questions, if you would like me to send you any of these documents, please just get in touch and I'd be glad to do that or answer any other questions.